And for our last talk, I want to bring on Sreeram from EigenLayer to talk about basically everything that could possibly go wrong with EigenLayer. We're going to have a pretty interesting back and forth to analyze some of the attack vectors and risks. So without further ado, let's welcome Sreeram on stage.
Kartik. Thank you, Kartik. Excited to be here. Looking forward to hear all the ways in which we can break EigenLayer. I'm Ethereum.
This was meant to be a conversation on data availability, but I think this one is a much better conversation topic. The way I want to frame it is maybe we'll kind of spend 2 minutes defining some of the key terminologies here, and then from my perspective, the goal here is to come up with the FAQ of what could go wrong and the actual answers. So let's start with two things. Let's define what restaking is, and then also what is AVS.
Yeah, EigenLayer is a platform that allows anybody who has tokens in the Ethereum platform to stake their tokens and make credible commitments. Commitments that I will run a certain validation function correctly. These commitments are endogenous. What do I mean by endogenous? I make a commitment that I will not steal from your shop, and I can hold to it myself. These commitments are very different from like monetary commitments, like, I go and put up a collateral and then borrow something, and then when the price moves between these two things, that's not something I control. That is exogenous market risk. Pretty much all of DeFi is the risk that you're underwriting is some kind of price risk, relative price volatility. In EigenLayer, what you're underwriting when you're doing validation is you're putting up a stake and making a promise that you will not perform a malicious action when you're doing the validation. And this is endogenous, something that you can control yourself. What is an AVS? AVS is an actively validated service. Actively, which means you have to do something to validate, to make sure that the service is running correctly. A simplest example of an actively validated service is a chain. I want to run a new chain on top of something else, on top of the stake. That would be an actively validated service. But the scope of actively validated services is much larger than chains. Imagine I'm sitting on Ethereum and I want to make a call to an oracle. So some group of nodes need to go and fetch some prices and then put them on Ethereum. That would be an actively validated service. I want to run a co-processor. I want to run, when I lock my liquidity into a Uniswap v3 pool or a v4 hook, I want to make sure that the liquidity is only provisioned in a certain price range, where the price range is decided as a function of the historic toxicity of the, order flow. This is something you could do by calling, let's say, a AI co-processor, a processor that would actually run this and then bring the answer into Ethereum. These things don't need to be chains. There is no, chain structure.
Data that matters, not the, yeah.
Exactly. It is a certain input that the service is providing. That is what matters. You can think of these as trusted APIs, right? Like, in like the cloud era, we have APIs. You can go call an API and it'll give you an answer. But a co-processor is a trusted API, a trusted because it is underwritten with a certain amount of capital that output will be correct. So that's the two sides: stakers, people who stake. There's a nearby side to the staker side, which is operators, people who actually run the computational operations. And we assume that the relationship between the staker and operator is arbitrary. We don't constrain these relationships. And then finally, there is services. Anybody can come and build new services. EigenLayer, Eigen in German for your own, which means open innovation. We want more people to come and build their own things on top. So that's the overall structure of EigenLayer.
Throw in one curveball. What is LRT? Let's just put that in perspective, and then we should be ready for the fight.
Okay, getting ready for the fight. LRT, a liquid restaking token. So what's a liquid restaking token? When you stake in EigenLayer, whether that may be staked to Ethereum and then restake through EigenLayer. So the way you stake in Ethereum and restake to EigenLayer is you stake in Ethereum, set the withdrawal credentials to your own sub-smart contract in the EigenLayer system called an EigenPod. So what this does is you create your own zone inside the EigenLayer thing, and then now you can actually set your withdrawal credentials in the Ethereum staking to this, your eigenpod. And your eigenpod you can control because you can have the keys for that. So that's the basic structure of restaking. Now, what is liquid restaking tokens is somebody does all of this for you. So you just come in and you have a bunch of ETH. And you're like, man, I don't want to go find operators. I don't want to go vet these AVSs. What are these AVSs? How do I know if any of them are any good? How do you know they're paying the right price? Is it overpaying, underpaying? I don't want to do any of this stuff. I want somebody to do all of this for me. Okay. So there may be some kind of a democratic governance, which may be run by, a committee or a token, or like some kind of dual governance like Lido has with, the position holders and the native token holders. But the basic idea is, as a staker, you don't want to do a lot of this work and you want to outsource it. So people started building these things called liquid restaking protocols. And the output of a liquid restaking protocol is I put in an ETH and then I get a liquid restaking token, which is like a liquid representation of my position.
Of your liquid position.
No, the position would have not been liquid if I didn't do the liquid restaking token. Oh, there are some others who stake LST into the EigenLayer contracts and then create a liquid restaking position. So there is now like native LRT and then liquid LRT. But these differences don't matter as much as one might think, because fundamentally all you can think about is you're delegating different set of operators to run your Ethereum thing and a different set of operators to run your EigenLayer services, which is actually maybe beneficial in some ways. But that's the overall structure. So now you have a liquid restaking token, which represents your position in EigenLayer. So that's what a liquid restaking token is.
So does the
short for LRT, which is what Kartik asked.
So does the liquid restaking token or the EigenLayer chain have, or just that system rather, just abstract system, have the knowledge of what level deep this token is? Meaning, can I actually restake a liquid token?
Oh, great question. So when people think about like looping a liquid restaking token or whatever, or restaking or whatever people
exactly where I'm getting to.
You can't do that on EigenLayer. So what it means is in EigenLayer, the contracts know what your position is. So we only allow native staking or some kind of LST, which only does staking outside. So why is this needed? This is important because EigenLayer wants to maintain a full accounting of all the risks as closely as possible. This is one of the reasons we keep saying that eventually EigenLayer should be internalized into Ethereum. The restaking protocol should be internalized into Ethereum because Ethereum has the most context, both at the staking level and every other level that can then be built on top. You need a single point lock on the entire system. And in the absence of Ethereum internalizing it in the short term, we are trying to make sure that all the activities and risks that are underwritten purely out of validation are fully transparent. Because EigenLayer has mechanisms to use this transparency to do all kinds of allocation and cryptoeconomic calculations, which we'll get into later. But it is very important that all the risks or all the different commitments. So you think of like I'm putting in a stake and I'm making a bunch of credible commitments. And I want to make sure that the total volume of those commitments are well accounted for.
Who are you speaking on behalf of? Because in this case, that means you are running AVS.
Okay. The EigenLayer protocol needs to be aware of this whole thing because the EigenLayer protocol is making sure that each AVS is getting a certain portion of what we call attributable security. And the idea of attributable security is, so the interface between the AVS and EigenLayer, there are two models. The simplest model is what we call pooled security. Pooled security is, hey, there is a big pool of stake, and let's say there's $10 billion stake today. So you take this $10 billion of stake, and all these stakers opt into, let's say, 100 projects, 100 AVSs. Now, to attack any one AVS, I need to acquire a $10 billion capital. And I know if I do attack, if the validators collude to attack this AVS, they're going to lose half of this $10 billion of capital. So that is a much, much higher security guarantee than if each of these 100 protocols went their own way to acquire the stake, because each of them would get only $100 million of stake at the par-like rewards.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that is our first model of security. So I'll explain the second model of security. So that sets up like for some of the attacks that might come up. So in this model of security, if some service wants to slash like the stakers, what happens is all the stake is burnt. All the attackers are found out and the stake is burnt. It's not redistributed. It is not attributably allocated to the different AVSs. So all that you have as a AVS is this guarantee that if somebody attacks my protocol, I know that like $5 billion of stake might get burnt. And that is a rigid guarantee for me to like build something on. But what you miss in this kind of like a pooled security model is the ability to know. So imagine there are 100 protocols, and one of them is a really big protocol, maybe Base wants to build on top of EigenLayer. And Base is saying, hey, all these other protocols are happy with 100 million security. Maybe they only need 10 million security. I need $3 billion of security because, I'm moving more value, whatever. So there's no way to attribute this. In the original pool security model, everybody is smudged together into a common pool. By the way, that's exactly what Ethereum does. Ethereum smudges all the applications together into a common security pool. Right. So, okay, now what can we do better? What we do better is the second model of security we call attributable security. Attributable security is when you come to EigenLayer and you buy a portion of slashing rights, you want to buy these slashing rights. Let's say, Base or...
Is the AVS buying these rights?
AVS is the one that's buying these rights, absolutely. So, because AVS is the one that's worried that they're smudging together with all these rando AVSs.
You're competing and you want to offer better services or...
Exactly. You want to do something more than what you could do in the burning scenario. Maybe, for example, you're running a bridge and you want to say that, hey, I have like a weekly transaction volume of $100 million in this bridge, and I have more than $100 million like attributable security, so I'm perfectly covered. So you can actually make claims like this. To do this, you need to be able to say that I will not only be able to slash, I will be able to slash and uniquely redistribute this portion of money, even if all the other AVSs slash simultaneously. So this is what we call attributable security. And this requires EigenLayer to maintain the contract, EigenLayer contracts. You mentioned EigenLayer chain just to make sure other people are on par. EigenLayer is not a chain, EigenLayer is just a system of smart contracts on Ethereum. So EigenLayer contracts on Ethereum maintain this proof of solvency. The proof of solvency is that like all my attributions can be simultaneously honored no matter what happens in the system. So that's a calculation that EigenLayer needs to maintain. But the benefit that you get with attributable security is now you are getting this portion of, let's say, $3 billion of security just for yourself as Base, as an AVS, but you also get the benefit to attack your protocol. 3 billion is not enough. You need 10 billion. And the remaining portion of it is still going to be slashed. So this gives a very rigid guarantee to the AVSs.
Well, this actually creates a whole new set of other things because now you have created a marketplace where people have to compete. So the obvious question I have from this is, that means for me to go from 3 billion to 10, I need to figure out how do I incentivize people to transfer to me, which usually means I will introduce a token, or maybe points, or both.
And you can pay in ETH, no problem.
Well, people will not transfer their ETH to me in this hypothetical scenario. I'm not running any AVS. This is not financial advice. So the question becomes, well, you now have an incentive structure that can be introduced, and chances are it will be. And that can mess up the accounting because I will end up offering you a better yield than being another AVS. And the question is, well, where does that yield come from? And how does that actually affect effectively people thinking about the worth of their LRTs or their restaked tokens? Now, is that a valid concern?
It is a valid concern for an AVS to understand how they actually accrue a certain portion of restaking or a certain portion of attribution. Even in the pool security model, even though I called it the pool security model, the way EigenLayer works is each staker decides what they restake into. So the pooling is like market emergent rather than like...
So more on the slashing argument.
It is more on what happens to the slashing argument. Exactly. It is basically, in the first model, you just burn the funds. So there is no need to specifically attribute which AVS I'm slashing for because burning is burning. Like it doesn't matter whether I'm burning for AVS1 or AVS2. When I'm doing redistribution, you need to be specific. But back to this question, so you do need like the AVSs to incentivize the stakers to restake to them. And so how do we do this? How do AVSs do this? We don't know it, but AVSs need to do it. How do they do it? They can do one of, let's say, two fundamental models. One is, hey, I'm getting a bunch of fees for my AVS. And because I'm getting fees, I can pay a portion of the fees to the stakers. That's one model. Of course, on day zero, when you're introducing a new AVS, you probably have no fees. And so therefore, you're not able to attract a lot of stakers.
But I can launch a token and have you stake that.
That's the second option. Have you staked that? Okay, that's a new idea.
Because that's how, well, if you look at a lot of the DeFi protocols from the DeFi summer wave, the whole way to bootstrap that was, well, we'll just stake our own tokens, which you just earned. And that's how you boost up the APR, which means that I can now combine and amortize the interest rate by combining the yield from my own token plus the restake token, which creates this compound packed product that is honestly a mess. So,
okay, so maybe this is the third model. I'll tell you the second.
That's the first two, yes.
The simple second model is the AVS has a value accrual token. And the token is, some kind of a system which basically says, hey, whenever we get fees through the AVS, some fraction of it goes to the DAO or treasury or something, and therefore this token's potentially valuable. And now, I want the stakers to be aligned with this system, so I'm giving a portion, because I don't have fees today, but I have a portion of potential fees that I'm allocating to the, through my own token, that I'm allocating to the Ethereum stakers who stake to me. So that would be the natural next model. And this is already like pretty powerful because I have a, as an AVS, you have a token and you potentially have at least future fees. Otherwise, you've not thought about the model. Now, and then you're allocating a portion of it to the stakers to actually restake to yourself. So that is the second model. I think there is some more complex third model that you're alluding to, and I want to listen to.
So we have to cover that, but here's another scenario that may happen from the second model you talked about. I introduce a token as an AVS, and let's say I'm a smaller one, so I have 100 million of security that I'm kind of covering as an AVS, and I launch my token, and it goes really big, and now my token's FTV is 200 million. And I do a bad job as an AVS and get slashed, but technically, I can use my token on the open market and still redeem some ETH for it, and still subsidize people who got slashed potentially, or find a way to minimize loss. Now, does that affect the global state of the system?
Okay, so there is a few assumptions baked in. So what happens when an AVS goes wrong? So let's start from that. So what does it mean for an AVS to go wrong? Firstly, a staker is making a promise that I am not going to do malicious validation activity. And why do we need this? We need this because it's a permissionless open system, and who knows who the heck these stakers are and whether they will actually hold to their covenants that they've promised. So that's why we need stake. Now, if you go to the AVS side, what the staker is concretely opting into is through the EigenLayer system, they're opting into a AVS contract. The AVS contract specifies what the registration condition is, which stakers can register, what the payment condition is, whether it's a fee payment or a token payment or whatever. And then the third one is, what is the slashing covenants? What is the situations under which you will be slashed? And that's written into the smart contract. Now, if you look at an AVS contract, and the simplest scenario is the AVS has objective slashing conditions on a contract. Now, if a staker is opting in, they actually know what the covenants that they're opting into and what they could get slashed from. And to protect any bugs, and of course, we know in crypto, there are bugs always in all these systems. To protect against any bugs in the system, we have a manual committee, the slashing veto committee, which has to approve. So the way slashing approval works in EigenLayer is the contract has to trigger a slashing request and the committee has to approve it. Only then the slashing is considered approved. So the committee cannot unilaterally slash stakers, but the committee can veto the slashing. So that's all that the committee's power is. So the trust assumption from the staker point of view is if either the contract is right or the veto committee works correctly, then they will not get slashed for a non-malicious action. no matter what the AVS does, right?
Just it's how you want a system to work. But we're talking about crazy scenarios, which means like assume they get slashed, but they had a token.
No. But let's go through like why they got slashed despite these two things, right? So I want to make sure that that's covered. So the first thing is, because there is a slashing veto committee, the veto committee onboards AVSs. So, you couldn't just onboard a random AVS without the permission of the veto committee, because they need to know what the heck they are like vetoing for. What is the true slashing condition that it represents? So random, crazy AVSs may not be.
I can just launch an AVS and show up next week without. Yeah. Okay.
No,
is that a short-term thing, or is that? But
how do we think about this long-term? So we don't like any of these permission intervention structures, but it is important to keep the fidelity of the system in the short term. What do we think about in the long term? The first thing is, if you launch an AVS and you have stress tested it with the slashing veto committee over a certain period of time, then you can move from a protected by the veto committee to unprotected by the veto committee. Of course, stakers are going to be very suspicious of a service that is not protected by a veto committee. And we're not going to enable this day one, but in the short to medium term.
Yes.
Yeah. So in that case, what happens is AVSs will migrate to a more immutable structure where they are not, and therefore they have to convince the stakers to move with them or restake to them, because they are actually underwriting a very open risk that the contract is wrong. In the short term, so the evolution path is AVSs launch with the protection of a veto committee and then move to a permissionless strata. Even this veto committee, we are actually thinking how to make it like a marketplace. For example, in the MEV supply chain, there is this role called the relay, right?
You compete and
so that could be like a marketplace of veto committees. So we don't need to be trying to
introduce a whole new vector here. Collusion. Okay.
What's the collusion risk there?
Well, it's not collusion, but it's you now can actually you can actually make it a higher probability of somebody disagreeing with your ability to prevent the slashing, even if the slashing was honest. So you can bank on probabilistically, people would say, let them have a pass. And that means you can create weird incentives on the AVS side.
Yeah, so the slashing veto committee is a doubly trusted party, just like the relay is a doubly trusted party. So the AVS has to agree to the slashing veto committee, and the staker has to agree, and they can only interact if they go through the common, trusted party. So that's what basically the market structure is. So what it does prevent is interactions when you don't have a common trusted committee. Then you can't interact.
An open marketplace in this sense, because you still need some sort of ability to need trust.
Yeah, exactly. Just like the relays today. So that is the structure. So despite all these things, catastrophe can strike. We are in crypto land. So what do we do? What happens when an AVS does slash some stake? If these two assumptions are broken, then we don't know what will happen, right? So that's basically the trust model is, okay, now it's going to get slashed. If it's in the redistribution model, the redistribution power goes to whoever bought the insurance, which may be the DAO, or it may be a smart contract that has reallocation rights to some users. So in those scenarios, it's possible that an AVS uses its own token, and if it's still solvent, so to say, to actually subsidize or protect users or stakers in that scenario. So,
well, it helps the minimize the loss for the user, but how does that impact the EigenLayer system?
If a large amount of stake in the EigenLayer ecosystem got slashed for, both these trust models broke, which is that the contract of slashing was wrong and the slashing veto committee is wrong, then you do get this thing where people are losing money. And what fraction of stakers lose money? What is the scale of this event?
It doesn't mess up the accounting of the system. So
no.
Not ever in
No.
Right.
The unconditional correctness of attributable security holds, which means even if an AVS is completely wrong and has a bonkers slashing condition, it doesn't matter. If you have a certain attributable security, you have it. Unless the EigenLayer contract is wrong, which is also a possibility. So, we just need to examine, this is the case with all the blockchain systems. We need to examine each layer of trust assumption. And one of the things we take a lot of care, and we mentioned liquidity staking tokens, so I just want to mention this. We take a lot of care is in the EigenLayer core contracts. If the EigenLayer contracts do get hacked, God forbid, you cannot withdraw money from the EigenLayer contract. All withdrawals from the EigenLayer contracts take a 1-week escrow. So EigenLayer contracts themselves have like a pausing and like a security council and all these things to make sure that, in case something really goes wrong, there is a protection against.
Fail safe.
So that's how the whole thing works. There are because of all of these things, there is a bunch of the slashing veto committee, there's a security council. All L2s today have security councils, and that's just over time as the contracts
You start this way, otherwise you can't.
it's risky. Yeah.
All right, so we'll try to do some quick ones, and I'll try to be meta about this thing. So I'll ask you to figure out what could go wrong instead of me pointing out an example, because I don't think I'm going to win on this one. So the most obvious one is, well, what are possible scenarios where we get some sort of leverage restaking situations happen, and how does that affect the whole system? If I can get 100x or 10x on my restaked ETH, and it's just crazy APRs everywhere, what goes wrong in those worlds?
Yeah, this is something that actually...
So is that even possible?
It is possible, and it is concerning. So how is it possible? How is it concerning? You can't natively leverage on EigenLayer. You can't stake ETH, get an LRT, and then take the LRT and stake it on EigenLayer. That's not possible. But you can stake, get an LRT, which is a representation of your staked position, go to a lending market, pledge it, get ETH, deposit it, get an LRT, pledge it, and go round and round.
EigenLayer CDP.
This kind of thing.
People got that one. Yeah. This is great.
So this is leveraged restaking. I say everywhere that EigenLayer does not have leverage, but leveraged restaking absolutely has leverage. It's there in the word, leverage restaking. So you're going round and round in this, pledging an LRT and getting ETH. So why are you doing it? Why are people doing it? They're doing it because they want to get leveraged exposure to whatever rewards that go through the EigenLayer system.
So, of course, that's possible and allowed, but in a case where you get liquidated for getting margin called, it shouldn't affect the system, right? So am I missing something?
No, it doesn't affect the EigenLayer system itself, but that the thing that might happen is, if there is a lot of LRT loop like this, then temporarily, this week to next, there is a withdrawal period, 1 week to 2 weeks, and after the 2 weeks, you have a lot of stake might move out. So there's just a fluctuation of security.
You can move the price everywhere and maybe possibly create cascade effects.
Yeah, the cascade effects are basically that the AVS has, exactly. The outside cascade effects are what we are worried about, which is that people think, I'm doing this thing, what can go wrong? How would an LRT not be equal to ETH? There are all kinds of short-term scenarios why an LRT won't be equal to an ETH. And it's because there's no liquidity for this thing. And now you're not only dependent on the ability to withdraw from EigenLayer, you're also dependent on the ability to withdraw from your LRT. And LRTs may not have withdrawals enabled or have withdrawals enabled after a lag or whatever other thing is going on. So there may be a scenario like I described, the EigenLayer contract gets hacked. And the contract, the security council probably meet and revert the hack. But in the intervening period, you think the LRT is going to hold peg? Maybe not. And then everybody gets liquidated in their positions. So of course, this risk is not affecting EigenLayer per se, but this is an extraneous second order thing. Imagine there is a big stable coin built on top of an LRT or something else, and all these things can get affected. So it is a DeFi risk. It is not an EigenLayer risk, but we caution users not to use leverage. It's just something but it is a permissionless platform, so each user up to their own. But at least understand all the risks that are involved before you go take a leverage position.
I have 3 other things I want to cover, but I'm gonna test the waters on this one, and if this ends up being more than a 2-minute answer, then we'll continue this another time. So here's another crazy scenario: I have $10 billion of ETH staked on EigenLayer, and EigenLayer launches a token. Can that token represent $10 billion of collateral effectively behind it? And that creates a whole, not directly, but can that be the representation in the eyes of people that, hey, look, the EigenLayer token basically is a access to this much pooled security, and I can now do crazier things with restaking that or leveraging on that, and that may cause some damage. Does that change anything? Is that even a worry?
That's not a model that we're building. So one of the things a lot of people thought we would be doing is to launch our own like liquid staking or liquid restaking token, and we have no interest or
You guys, I was doing it. Is there a liquidity staking?
yeah, that's one of the reasons a lot of like people are trusting us and building their own like liquid restaking tokens and stuff.
Great. Next one is, what are other possible scenarios where there could be mass slashings?
Other possible scenarios where there could be mass slashing is basically something goes wrong in the AVS contracts, right? The AVS has a slashing contract. What if something goes wrong there? What if something goes wrong in the EigenLayer slashing contracts? There's some bug to trigger slashing on EigenLayer that is protected by the security council, but we have to worry about it. Those are the two fundamental reasons that trigger slashing in the